What happens when one of cinema's most revered living legends, a man whose six-decade career has shaped American film, walks onto a late-night talk show expecting the usual promotional chatter, only to find himself caught in a trap disguised as comedy? A man who has won every award worth winning, worked with the greatest directors, and built a legacy on artistic integrity, suddenly facing a host who believes political activism gives him the right to turn the conversation into an ambush. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone off the rails. It's a collision between two worlds. A Hollywood icon who has spent decades letting his work speak for itself, and a comedian convinced that his stage is a platform for political spectacle. A discussion that should have been about movies, craft, and storytelling instead becomes a tense showdown about politics, respect, and the unspoken rules of celebrity appearances. You're about to see Robert Dairo, the Godfather Part 2 legend, the two-time Oscar winner, the man who spent decades commanding respect without ever raising his voice, finally reach his breaking point. Jimmy Kimmel thought he could create a viral moment, a headline-making spectacle, by steering the conversation away from Dairo's latest passion project and into political territory. What he didn't anticipate was that Dairo doesn't bow to anyone, especially when his career and dignity are on the line. The interview had been meticulously arranged months in advance. Dairo's latest film was a labor of love, a story that mattered deeply to him, crafted with a director he admired. His publicist had made it clear: focus on the movie, keep it light. Give Bob the respect his legacy deserves. Standard protocol when hosting a living legend whose career began long before most of the production staff were even born. But Jimmy Kimmel had other plans. Surrounded by writers trained during the Trump era to turn every interview into political commentary, he decided to exploit Dairo's occasional political voice for a moment. Why settle for promoting a meaningful film when you could generate social media buzz and headlines instead? What Kimmel failed to calculate was Dairo's unparalleled experience in Hollywood. 6 decades of respect, countless accolades, and a career built on refusing to be manipulated meant one thing. When Robert Dairo feels disrespected, he doesn't just sit there, he doesn't compromise. And when a host sacrifices an artist's dignity for the sake of ratings, there are consequences. This isn't about whether you agree with Dairo or Kimmel politically. It's not even about whether celebrities should mix activism with entertainment. This is about respect, boundaries, and what happens when someone who has earned the right to control their own narrative refuses to be used as a prop. Jimmy Kimmel thought he was making history. What he actually created was a lesson in humility. Sometimes the person who walks away is the one who truly wins, because when Robert Dairo decides your stage isn't worth standing on, it speaks louder than any punchline, any viral clip, or any headline ever could. That evening, the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio was buzzing as usual. The audience filed in, excited and expectant. The band played their pre-show riffs. Everything seemed normal, until the collision of ego, artistry, and principle turned a routine interview into a cultural moment that exposed the cracks in late-night comedy. This is more than an awkward interview. It's a masterclass in dignity, a revelation about the exhaustion with constant politicization, and a reminder that some legends simply won't be made to perform loyalty tests on national television. Buckle up, because what you're about to witness is explosive, unforgettable, and a moment where one of the greatest actors in American history refused to compromise for the sake of entertainment. The studio buzzed with energy as the lighting crew made their final adjustments, ensuring every camera angle captured perfection. This was no ordinary booking. Robert Dairo rarely appeared on late-night talk shows, and when he did, it was an event. The audience knew they were about to witness a living legend, someone whose filmography reads like a history of American cinema's finest achievements. Backstage, Dairo sat in his dressing room with the quiet intensity that had defined his career. At 80 years old, he still carried a presence that commanded attention without a word. His publicist went over the schedule one last time. Discuss the new film, perhaps share a funny anecdote from the set. Keep it light. Keep it promotional standard late-night protocol. Meanwhile, in Jimmy Kimmel's dressing room, the tone was entirely different. The host and his head writer were poring over notes that had nothing to do with Dairo's film. Every note centered on his past political statements, criticisms of politicians, and outspoken views on issues he cared about. "We can't waste this," Jimmy said, tapping his papers. "He's been vocal before. Let's have a conversation that matters, not just another boring movie interview." His head writer hesitated, reminding him that Dairo's team had been clear. The focus should be on the movie. But Jimmy cut him off, that edge in his voice making it clear discussion was over. "Sure, we'll talk about the film," he said, "but we're also going to have a real conversation. That's what makes good television." What Jimmy called a real conversation would soon reveal itself for what it really was: an ambush designed to turn a promotional appearance into political theater. The show opened as planned. Jimmy delivered his familiar mix of political jokes and celebrity gossip to warm applause, setting the stage for what seemed like a routine segment. Then came the introduction, the reverent tone reserved for true legends. Our next guest needs no introduction, but I'll give him one anyway. Two-time Academy Award winner, 7-time Oscar nominee, star of The Godfather Part 2, Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, Goodfellas. Please welcome the legendary Robert Dairo. The audience erupted as Dairo walked out, a subtle smile on his face, acknowledging the applause with understated grace. He shook Jimmy's hand and settled into the guest chair, ready for a pleasant conversation about his work. Or so he thought. "Bob, thanks so much for being here," Jimmy began warmly, giving no hint of the trap ahead. "I want to talk about the new film, but first, you look great. What's your secret?" Dairo's dry wit emerged effortlessly. "Good lighting and talented cinematographers," he replied, and the audience laughed, enjoying the humble humor from a man who could have taken the compliment entirely seriously. Jimmy laughed along, easing into what appeared to be an easy, genuine exchange. "So, the new film," Jimmy continued. "You've been working on this for 3 years. Tell us about it." Dairo leaned forward, animated and engaged, ready to discuss a project close to his heart. "It's a story I've wanted to tell for a long time. It's about—" But Jimmy's tone shifted, subtle enough that the audience might not notice, yet sharp enough for Dairo to recognize. "I have to ask you about something you said a few months ago at that awards ceremony." Jimmy interrupted. Dairo's calm voice hardened slightly, a warning anyone familiar with his career would immediately recognize. "I'm here to talk about the film," he said evenly. Though with a clear edge, Jimmy smiled, but it was the polished smile of performance, not connection. I know, and we'll get to that," he said. "But you've been pretty vocal about politics, and I think the audience would love to hear your thoughts." The audience sensed the shift immediately. Dairo interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "The audience is here because you told them I'd be talking about my new movie. That's why I'm here, to talk about the film." The easy, light-hearted atmosphere evaporated in an instant. The studio, once filled with laughter and applause, now bristled with tension as everyone realized this wasn't going to be a typical promotional interview. Jimmy's smile stayed in place, but his eyes betrayed a calculation, a commitment to the direction he'd planned with his writers. "Come on, Bob," he said, trying to make it sound like playful banter. "You can't come on a talk show and expect us not to talk about things you've said publicly. That's not how this works." Dairo's voice dropped, measured and sharp, and anyone familiar with his work knew that when he got quiet, it meant something serious. "Actually, this is exactly how it works," he said. "I agreed to come on your show to promote a film. My team communicated that clearly to your producers. If you wanted a political discussion, you should have been honest instead of ambushing me on live television." The word ambush landed in the room like a weight, hanging between them. For the first time, Jimmy's polished television smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of defensiveness. "Ambush? That's a strong word. I'm just asking questions people want answered." "No," Dairo replied flatly. "You're trying to turn a promotional interview into political theater because you think it'll get you headlines. That's not journalism, Jimmy. That's exploitation." The audience went silent. The playful expectation of late-night banter had vanished, replaced by the raw intensity of a real confrontation. This was no scripted tension. This was authenticity, building by the second. Jimmy leaned back, trying to reclaim control. "Look, Bob, I respect you tremendously." "If you respected me," Dairo interrupted, cutting through the pretense, "you'd be talking about my work instead of trying to make me perform for your political audience. If you respected me, you wouldn't have misled my team about the nature of this interview. We didn't lie to anyone. You said we'd discuss the film. That was the agreement. And now, 5 minutes in, you've spent more time on politics than on the project I actually came to promote." There was steel under Dairo's calm demeanor. "That's not respect, Jimmy. That's bait and switch." Jimmy's defensiveness escalated into aggression, perhaps realizing he was already in too deep to back down. "You know what, Bob? You've made millions from an industry and an audience with political opinions. You've been pretty happy to share yours when it suited you. Don't act like you're above all this now." Dairo's jaw tightened visibly. "There's a difference between speaking about issues I care about on my own terms and being ambushed on a talk show that promised one thing and delivered another. Do you understand that difference? Or has the obsession with viral moments completely eroded your sense of basic professional courtesy?" The tension in the studio reached a breaking point. Jimmy's face flushed red, a mix of embarrassment and frustration at being called out publicly on his own stage. "Professional courtesy," he repeated, voice rising. "You've called people some pretty harsh things in your political statements. Where was your courtesy then?" "When I speak about politics," Dairo said, his voice dangerously quiet, "it's in contexts where political discussion is expected and appropriate. Political events, fundraisers, interviews where everyone knows the agenda. I don't hijack someone else's platform under false pretenses." Leaning forward, Dairo's gaze fixed on Jimmy with the same intensity that had made him one of cinema's most magnetic performers. "What you're doing right now isn't brave political comedy. This isn't speaking truth to power. This is a host who can't have a normal conversation with a guest without turning it into a political performance for your increasingly small audience." The jab about audience size hit like a lightning bolt. Jimmy's ratings had been slipping for years, and having that fact pointed out on live television by Robert Dairo was not part of the plan. "My audience is doing just fine," Jimmy said defensively, "and they appreciate when we have real conversations instead of just promotional puff pieces." "Real conversations," Dairo repeated, and there was an almost pitying note in his tone now. "Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like someone so desperate to stay relevant, so desperate to prove their show still matters, that they're willing to disrespect a guest who came here in good faith." The audience was silent, transfixed. They were witnessing one of cinema's greatest actors systematically dismantle a talk show host on the host's own stage. This wasn't scripted tension or staged drama. It was real, raw, and escalating with every word Jimmy's band leader shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to break the moment with music or stay silent and let it unfold. The cameras kept rolling. This was live television at its most unpredictable. "You know what, Bob?" Jimmy said, his voice tight with someone committed to defending a failing position. "Maybe if you didn't want to discuss politics, you shouldn't have been so vocal about them in the first place. You can't have it both ways." "I can absolutely have it both ways," Dairo replied, calm and unwavering. "I can speak about issues I care about in appropriate contexts, while also expecting that, when I agree to do a promotional interview about a film, the host will honor that agreement." "Those aren't contradictory positions, Jimmy. That's just basic honesty." Then, suddenly, he stood. The movement was so decisive, it startled everyone. Audience, crew, even Jimmy himself. Dairo began removing his microphone with the same careful precision that had characterized his craft for 6 decades. "What are you doing?" Jimmy asked, panic creeping into his voice as he realized the night was unraveling. "I'm leaving," Dairo said simply, setting the microphone gently on his chair. "I came here to discuss a film I'm proud of, to talk about the work we did, to maybe share some stories from set. Instead, I got ambushed by a host more interested in using me as a prop for his political comedy than treating me like an artist with something to offer beyond sound bites." "Bob, come on," Jimmy said, standing now, trying to physically block Dairo's path, or at least maintain the illusion of control. "Don't be so sensitive. We're just having a conversation." "No, Jimmy," Dairo interrupted, his voice carrying absolute finality. "You're trying to have a conversation you want to have, with no regard for what I agreed to or why I'm here. That's not a conversation. That's a monologue you expected me to participate in." He moved toward the edge of the stage with deliberate, unyielding purpose. Jimmy's attempts to continue engaging looked increasingly desperate. The audience didn't know how to react. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others seemed quietly supportive. And a few were utterly bewildered. "You walk out now. You're proving you can't handle being challenged," Jimmy called after him, one last attempt to frame Dairo's principled stand as weakness. Dairo paused, turned back, and spoke with the weight of 6 decades in an industry that had tried and failed to compromise his integrity. "I've handled being challenged my entire career, Jimmy. Real challenges, directors who pushed me, roles that demanded everything I had, critics who questioned my choices. What I won't handle is being disrespected by someone who mistakes controversy for content." He gestured broadly at the stage, the lights, the cameras, everything that late-night television represents. "You've got your cameras, your audience, your platform. Use it however you want. But you'll do it without me. I don't participate in bad faith. I never have. And at 80 years old, I'm not starting now to help your ratings." Then the applause began. Not everyone, but enough to make it unmistakable. The audience was applauding Dairo, applauding his refusal to be used, applauding someone finally standing up to the constant politicization of entertainment. Jimmy's face cycled through anger, embarrassment, desperation, and, perhaps, the dawning realization that he had miscalculated spectacularly. "Bob, if you leave, you're not welcome back," he said, an attempt to regain authority. Dairo actually smiled, a real, unguarded smile, for the first time since the tension had started. "Jimmy, that's the first honest thing you've said all night. And that's perfectly fine with me. I have plenty of places to talk about my work where the hosts actually want to discuss it." With that, he walked off the stage, leaving Jimmy alone, scrambling to salvage a situation that was beyond repair. The band leader looked at Jimmy, waiting for a signal. Play music, cut to commercial, do anything to ease the excruciating awkwardness in the studio. "Well," Jimmy muttered, trying for levity and failing completely, "I guess Bob had somewhere else to be." The audience didn't laugh. They understood that what they had witnessed wasn't a scheduling conflict or a prima donna moment. It was a legendary actor refusing to compromise his dignity for someone else's idea of television. Jimmy tried to continue with the show, bringing out his next guest and making jokes about Dairo's departure, attempting to frame it as the actor being unable to handle direct questions. But the energy in the studio had shifted irrevocably. The audience had seen a host betray the basic compact between interviewer and guest, a legend disrespected for clicks and controversy, and a cultural moment where late-night comedy's obsession with politics had finally pushed someone past the breaking point. Backstage, Dairo was already in his car before Jimmy had finished his next segment. His publicist began frantically making calls to control the narrative, but Dairo stopped her. "There's no damage," he said quietly. "I came to discuss the film. The host wanted to discuss politics instead of honoring our agreement. I left, that's the story, and I'm comfortable with it." Within minutes, clips of the confrontation were circulating online. Robert Dairo started trending worldwide reactions, split along predictable lines. Some praised Jimmy for attempting real conversations, while others condemned him for ambushing a guest. But the overwhelming majority, including many who disagreed politically with Dairo, respected his decision to walk rather than participate in something he hadn't agreed to. Film critics and entertainment journalists weighed in, noting that Dairo's walkout represented a larger cultural fatigue, with late-night television's inability to let entertainment remain entertainment, to allow artists to promote their work without political litmus tests, and to respect the boundaries guests set for their appearances. Jimmy's show, which had already been struggling in the ratings, took an immediate hit. Publicists for other major stars quietly reconsidered future bookings, wary of similar ambushes. The incident quickly became a case study in how not to treat guests, how not to conduct interviews, and how not to confuse personal agenda with professional platform. Jimmy offered a half-hearted explanation, suggesting Dairo had been overly sensitive and that political discussion was fair game for someone who had engaged publicly in it. But the explanation landed poorly. Audiences saw through the defensiveness. Meanwhile, Dairo appeared on other shows to promote his film. Hosts who genuinely wanted to discuss the work, who treated him with the respect his career demanded, who understood that the compact between guest and host must be honored. On these shows, he was charming, insightful, and forthcoming about his craft. The contrast with the Kimmel appearance could not have been starker, and unexpectedly, the controversy only benefited the film, drawing attention and audiences curious about the project that had sparked a legendary stand. The walkout generated far more publicity than a standard promotional interview ever could. But more importantly, it reminded people why they had respected Robert Dairo in the first place. Not just for his acting, but for his refusal to compromise, his insistence on integrity, and his determination not to be used for purposes he hadn't agreed to. The incident sparked broader conversations about the state of late-night television, had the constant focus on politics, alienated audiences who just wanted entertainment. Had hosts forgotten that their primary job was to make guests look good, rather than to turn them into vehicles for political commentary? Some defended Jimmy, arguing that celebrities who speak publicly about politics should expect political questions regardless of context. But most recognized a crucial distinction. There's a difference between asking political questions in appropriate contexts and hijacking a promotional interview after explicitly agreeing not to. Dairo's walkout also highlighted shifting power dynamics in entertainment media. For decades, the assumption had been that celebrities needed late-night shows more than the shows needed them. But his departure, and the overwhelming public support it received, demonstrated that the balance had changed. In an era of social media, podcasts, and endless entertainment options, a poorly handled appearance could damage a show far more than it could hurt the guest. What made this particular moment so significant was who was involved. This wasn't a young actor making a principled stand early in their career. This was Robert Dairo, a legend whose place in film history was secure, whose contributions were undeniable, and whose reputation was untouchable. Nothing Jimmy Kimmel could say or do could diminish that legacy. That security made the walkout powerful. Dairo didn't need Kimmel's show. He didn't need the exposure. He didn't need to endure a politically motivated ambush to sell tickets. He had nothing to lose. And sometimes, when someone has nothing to lose, real change becomes possible. The walkout also exposed a hard truth about late-night television. Somewhere along the way, these shows had stopped being about entertainment. They had started being about politics, playing to specific partisan demographics, and using guests as props to generate controversy. Dairo's departure was a rejection of that system. It was a reminder that entertainment could still be entertainment, that promotional interviews could still be promotional interviews, and that conversations didn't always need to be weaponized for political purposes. In the weeks that followed, other actors privately thanked Dairo for standing up to a system that had made them uncomfortable, but that they had felt powerless to challenge. His walkout gave them permission to set boundaries, insist on respect, and remember that they didn't owe any host their participation under terms they hadn't agreed to. Jimmy Kimmel's show continued, of course, but something had changed. An invisible line had been crossed. The incident became shorthand for everything wrong with late-night television, prioritizing politics over entertainment, betraying guest trust for clicks, and assuming controversy is more valuable than conversation. Meanwhile, Dairo's film benefited unexpectedly. Audiences who respected his walkout made a point of supporting the work he had come to promote, and critics who admired his principled stand gave the film more attention than it might have otherwise received. The movie succeeded on its own merits, but the walkout reminded everyone why they respected the man behind it. The lasting lesson of that night wasn't about politics or personalities. It was about respect, for guests, for agreements, and for the basic compact that makes entertainment media function. When hosts honor that compact, everybody wins. When they betray it for clicks and controversy, everybody loses, especially the hosts themselves. Robert Dairo taught that lesson with characteristic efficiency. He didn't need to shout, argue, or stage a scene. He simply refused to participate in something he hadn't agreed to. He walked away with his dignity intact and let the consequences speak for themselves. And those consequences spoke loudly. Legends don't need to compromise. Integrity matters more than exposure. Sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting back, but simply refusing to play a game that's rigged against you from the start. Jimmy Kimmel had wanted a viral moment. He got one, but not the one he expected. Instead of clips of Dairo making controversial political statements, the internet was flooded with a legend walking away from disrespect, an audience applauding that walkout, and a host left alone on stage, trying to explain why he had just driven away one of the greatest actors in American history. In Hollywood, where reputation is currency and respect is earned over decades, Robert Dairo's currency remained unshakable. Jimmy Kimmel's, however, was a different story. The walkout became his legacy moment, but not the kind he had hoped for. It was the moment when viewers learned that even late-night hosts can push too far, demand too much, and discover that some people simply won't compromise their dignity for anyone's entertainment. Robert Dairo walked off that stage and never looked back. He didn't need to. His work spoke for itself. It always had, and it always would. That is the privilege of being a legend. You owe no one anything except the quality of your art. And on that measure, Bob had nothing left to prove.